Now I will explain what socialism is or was supposed to be. And when I use this word socialism, try to forget, I know it's not easy, but try to forget everything you were taught or think you know about what this word means. It will become very obvious in the next hour or so. You were taught the meaning of socialism by capitalists. Capitalists are not going to do a good job explaining to you the good parts of a system that would threaten the capitalists' wealth and power and privilege. And just briefly, wealth and power and privilege, even in the United States. I found this in the San Diego Union Tribune, April 17th, 1995. Not exactly current events, but recent U.S. history. April 17th, by the way, is my birthday. Thank you, God, for giving me this gift to share. But it mentions the wealthiest 1% of U.S. families owns nearly 40% of the nation's wealth and power and privilege. What they call the 1% owns nearly 40% of the nation's wealth. And this from the Union Tribune also. Helen Copley owned it, by the way. Not exactly a liberal or a revolutionary, conservative Republican. One of America's wealthiest women. The financial editor of the Union Tribune, Don Bowder, and he is referring to figures from the Federal Reserve Board. The richest 2% of American families own 50% of the wealth and power and privilege. And again, Don Bowder, a nice picture of Don. He was the financial editor of the Union Tribune. The richest 5% own 77%. And this article from the Union Tribune by a famous political science professor named Holly Sklar, the richest 10% own nearly 90% of the value of all stocks and mutual funds. Maybe these figures aren't exactly the same nowadays, but they are approximately the same. Wealth and power and privilege. The richest 1% own 40%, richest 2% own 50%, 5% own 77%, 10% roughly owns 90%. And of course, they just got the Congress that they control with their campaign contributions to completely eliminate the inheritance tax, so now they can leave all of their wealth and power and privilege to their children. And it isn't just wealth, by the way. I'm not sure if they deserve it, that they shouldn't be allowed to have their wealth, but it's the power. The campaign contributions give them control of our so-called democracy. The richest 1% of 1%, Google this, it'll say it, the richest 1% of 1% gave nearly 28% of all the money raised in the elections recently. That's the richest 1% of 1% gave 28% of all of the money. Google that, it'll come up. What does the 1% give? The 2%, the 5%. And so really, we can vote for this candidate put up by the rich or that candidate put up by the rich. Nobody can run unless they have a lot of money and thus represent the interests of the rich. Instead of doing it this way, the way socialism was supposed to develop back in the middle 1800s in one particular country and some particular time for some particular reason, workers will rise up in revolution. Maybe some capitalist boss in some factory would do something outrageous, slap a worker or pull a Harvey Weinstein. Then the workers will immediately be outraged, throw that boss out the window, metaphorically throw the boss out the window. Workers around in the factory will see, why don't we do that? Me too. I want to throw my boss out the window. And from factory to factory, town to town, all around the country, and as soon as workers in one country have a revolution, kick out their dictatorial bosses, establish what I'll call now in shorthand fashion a workers' democracy. I'll be explaining this this more fully as I go through the next hour. Immediately, workers in the surrounding countries will see and get the idea, why don't we do that? I'm jealous, me too. I want to have a revolution, kick out my dictatorial boss, have my country be a workers' democracy based on the rights and interests of we the workers, the overwhelming majority of the people. That's why it's called a democracy, rather than having the government be run by the rich elite owners. And so the revolution will spread by force of example, not by military conquest, by force of example. Let's do that also, country to country, all around the world. Ultimately, in the end, workers of the world will unite. Famous last word of the Communist Manifesto, and that's what Marx wanted with worldwide socialism. Workers of the world unite. What he wanted was the unification and liberation of every human being alive and every human being he will ever live. He wasn't just in favor of unions, although Marx was a famous union organizer, but Marx realizes in capitalism unions only provide what Marx calls better wages for the slave. We had a good faculty union, by the way, so I got very good wages. Good wages, better wages for the slave. And of course, it's better to be a well-paid slave than a badly paid slave. Better to be a house slave than a field slave. Better not to be a slave at all. I'll show you how we intend to accomplish that before this is done. But I do remember, by the way, after hearing this lecture, one student told me he went right home and called up his older brother and said to his older brother, do you know what you want to be in life? You just want to be a well-paid slave. That's all you want to be, is a well-paid slave. Better to be a well-paid slave. Better not to be a slave at all. And so, not just unions, not just workers of one country. It wasn't supposed to be nationalism. It was supposed to be worldwide. Workers of the world unite. The peoples and countries of the planet should come together, democratically elect a central government of the planet, a federal government of the planet. Sometimes my students have called this the Federation. I'm not exactly sure where they get that term from. And so the model here would be the same as the United States of America. Just like in the United States, we have 50 separate states come together periodically every 2 to 4 years, democratically elect the central government, the federal government in Washington, D.C. The federal government in Washington, D.C., they're the ones with the main military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, keep the peace among the states. States can't fight wars with each other. California won't develop a big infantry, thinking let's invade Nevada, take over Las Vegas. Nevada doesn't have to worry. Let's develop a sophisticated air defense, protect ourselves against attack by California. Can't happen. Central government has the military, keeps the peace among the states. No wars among the states. Let's do the same thing worldwide. Let's have all the peoples and countries of the planet come together, democratically elect a central government of the planet, a one world government. I know I went to school during the Cold War. They always told us, oh, they want, communists want, Marxists want a one world government, making us think it would be like a military dictatorship in Russia. I'll be getting to that before we're done, of course. Wasn't supposed to be a one world military dictatorship. Man, that would be scary. One world government, democratically elected, of course, much different. That central government of the planet, democratically elected, they'll have the main military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, keep the peace among the countries. Countries after the worldwide revolution won't be allowed to have their own individual military forces. Just like our states, after our revolution, couldn't have their own individual military forces. Central government won't allow it, keeps the peace. Central government of the planet has the military. Countries can't have their own military forces, keep the peace among the countries. Peace on earth. redirect the money we spend on the military as best we can into the consumer. We'll still probably need something of a military in case there's a natural disaster or a civil war breaks out, but as best we can, scale back the military, spend the money on the people. Instead of developing better bombs to kill people more efficiently, spend the money on developing better consumer products to satisfy people more efficiently. And I remember once I had a student come up to me after lecture, start yelling at me. Sometimes people yell at me for giving these lectures, told me he had served in the military of the Ukraine and later the military of the United States. Professor, he yelled at me, don't even suggest the idea that there will ever be peace on Earth. There will never be peace on Earth. Human beings are a warlike species. We have always fought wars with each other. We always will fight wars with each other. How was I supposed to argue with that? Of course, see the devil lecture, but I'll point out with the weapons we have around nowadays, unless we find a way to get peace on Earth, doesn't look very likely that many of you will live to be my ripe old age. And so one world government, democratically elected, keeping the peace on Earth. I'll get to goodwill to men and women before Christmas in a future lecture, and it might be nice if everybody learned to speak the same language to facilitate communication and cooperation. I always like to suggest the United Nations approved language, Esperanto, devised by a language scientist, I believe in Latvia in the late 1800s for complete simplicity. And maybe none of you have ever heard of Esperanto. When I was in high school, all the cool kids got together after school to learn Esperanto. Not me, by the way. I wasn't one of the cool kids. I was going out to learn to play ball. That's why I'm a teacher. My father wanted us to have summers off so we could play ball every day all summer. But the cool kids, they were getting together after school, learn Esperanto. They wouldn't teach it in the public schools. Of course, you could take German or French or Spanish or Chinese or Japanese, and afterwards you could speak to a relatively few more people in the world, but still only a relatively few. Let's have everybody get together, start tomorrow, learn the same language. It was designed for simplicity. There are only 7 rules of grammar. There are no irregular verbs. I've never understood why we need irregular verbs. I still have nightmares that I was taking to grammar back in junior high school and I was being chased by an irregular verb. And all of the vocabulary words are cognates from the major European languages, the colonial languages, widely spoken, English and Spanish, of course, and also French. Everybody get together, start to learn this simple language. How long will it take? A year or so. Everybody in the world will speak the same language. Anywhere you go, you won't have any problem getting directions. We won't have any problems with translation. Facilitate communication. Facilitate cooperation. Maybe I should mention here that the classical locus for this would be the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. If I got this right in the beginning, we all spoke the same language. We could communicate. We could cooperate. We were capable of doing great things. And humanity started to build a tower to the heavens to be like God. God in his funky way got pissed off at our arrogance and decided to make us speak different languages so we can't understand each other. So it sounds like Babel. Now there's room for miscommunication, lack of cooperation, war. Let's have everybody learn to speak the same language. Facilitate communication and cooperation. And the key thing to remember as we construct this new society after the revolution, this is what's called socialism. The key thing to remember, all the people of working age in the new society after the revolution would have been born and raised in the old capitalist society from before the revolution. If the way I just sketched this, say the revolution happens tomorrow, spreads rapidly around the world by January 1st, 2019, Happy Revolutionary New Year, all the people of working age, January 1st, 2019, minimum working age is 16 years old. So if you're 16 years old in 2019, you were born in 2003. If you're 20 years old, you were born in 1999. Older workers like me, born before that. But all of the workers, even the youngest ones, even the 16 16-year-old have spent their 16 years being born and raised in modern American capitalism, so they're capitalists with capitalist values. By that I mean they are materialistic, and by saying you are materialistic, I don't just mean that you like to go shopping, although usually, of course, that's part of it, but by saying that you're materialistic, I mean you will only work for money, and you will only work extra for accordingly extra money. Doesn't motivate you at all if the boss or one of your coworkers says to you, will you work a few hours late tonight? It'll really make me happy if you do. Make them happy, won't make you happy. They want you to work, they gotta pay you money. They want you to work overtime, they gotta pay you overtime. And so to be realistic, the slogan of socialism, everybody gets what they work for, to each according to their work. This is not the ideal system for reasons I will be explaining in a next lecture, but for today it is necessary. We have to be realistic, recognize what we are dealing with after the revolution, all the workers born and raised in capitalism, capitalist values, materialistic, only work for money, only work extra for extra money. So to motivate them in socialism, that's what we do also. Everybody gets what they work for, to each according to their work, which of course so far sounds like capitalism. It has to sound like capitalism. We're trying to motivate workers coming out of capitalism. So in capitalism they motivate you by giving you money for your work, and so in socialism it'll be the same thing. We motivate you by giving you money for your work. Capitalists say we give you money for your work, socialists say we give you money for your work. What's the difference then between capitalism and socialism? In socialism they have abolished private ownership of the means of production. The means of production, the big businesses, the factories, the energy companies, the mines, the banks, no longer owned by private individuals. That's what capitalism means. Those with capital, those with money, private individuals with money, own the businesses, both big and small. In socialism, private individuals do not own the big businesses. Maybe private individuals can own the small businesses, but the big businesses, the means of production, factories, energy companies, mines, banks, and so on, no longer owned by private individuals. They are owned by the whole of the society. That's why this is called socialism. The society owns the big businesses, the means of production. And so from this point of view, we can see that Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. Bernie Sanders doesn't want the society to take over the means of production, doesn't want the government to take over the banks in the name of the people. Maybe Bernie Sanders doesn't want the banks to be so big, make them smaller, restore the virtues of competition, have more regulation so they don't gamble and take our economy broke again, but he doesn't call for the society owning the means of production. And it's completely ridiculous to call Obama a socialist. If Obama had been the socialist when he got elected president, he would have taken over the banks in the name of the people. That's not what Obama did. He gave the banks right back to the big stockholders, the private investors, bailed them out with taxpayer money. Wonder if they've paid it back yet. And so socialism, the society owns the means of production. That is the definition of socialism. So socialism has nothing to do with food stamps or welfare. Actually, food stamps, welfare, that's something the capitalists use to try to take away the potential for revolution among the desperately poor. After all, if children are hungry, children are starving, children are homeless, parents will do almost anything to prevent their kid from starving, even if it means risking their life in a revolution. So give poor people welfare, give them food stamps, give them medical care, then their children won't be starving, their children won't be dying, parents won't be thinking about risking their life in a revolution to make life better for their children. They'll just want to be parents to their children, pretty much what everybody wants to do in life. And so welfare, food stamps, just the way that the capitalists have of trying to take care of the revolutionary potential of the underclass. And traditionally, of course, there's one segment of the capitalist class that says, oh, we got to give them food stamps, we got to give them welfare, otherwise they'll rise up in revolution. And another bunch that says, oh no, those undeserving poor, I'm not going to give them my hard-earned money, I'd rather just pay a bunch of policemen and soldiers, give them weapons, and we'll teach anyone who complains a lesson. That's the debate among the capitalist ruling class. But society owns the means of production. That's all that socialism means. The means of production owned by the whole of the society. Socialism run by and for the workers. Why it's called a workers' democracy, I'll be getting to that soon. And what it means to pay people according to their work. Workers in socialism are put on what we today in capitalism call profit-sharing schemes. You get a percent of the profit according to the percent of work that you have done. And so let's imagine that we work for a socialist logging corporation, no longer owned by private individuals, owned by the whole of the society, run by and for the workers. You're paid according to your work. So if we collectively, say in a week, cut down 100 trees, and I myself do 10 of the 100 trees, I did 10% of the work, I get 10% of the profit. If I do 5 of the 100 trees, I did 5% of the work, I get 5% of the profit. 1 tree, did 1% of the work, I get 1% of the profit, direct percent of the profit, according to the percent of work you have done. Greatest incentive I could offer any one of you, while at the same time offering the greatest incentive to all of the rest of you as well. And a greater incentive than capitalism provides, especially if, as traditionally, they pay a straight wage, whatever that is, $6 an hour, $8 an hour, $10, $12 an hour, then as anyone who has ever had a straight wage job knows, and I had one once back when I was young, the incentive is not to work to the maximum. The incentive is to work to the minimum, just hard enough not to get fired. And I remember being very proud of myself back then. I thought I did that very skillfully, just worked hard enough not to get fired. Capitalists are recognizing increasingly a straight wage is not a good way to motivate workers. Capitalism today also putting workers on profit-sharing schemes. Capitalists stealing the idea of profit-sharing from the socialists. And that's a good move on the part of the capitalists, because profit-sharing is a great idea and well worth stealing. But when the capitalists steal the idea of profit-sharing and try to use it to motivate workers, profit-sharing does not motivate workers in capitalism quite as effectively as profit-sharing motivates workers in socialism. And I'm not saying that profit-sharing does not motivate workers in capitalism. Profit-sharing does motivate workers in capitalism. Profit-sharing is a great motivational tool, but it doesn't motivate workers in capitalism quite as effectively as it motivates workers in socialism, because say we have a pie graph diagram shows the profits in our corporation in socialism as compared to capitalism, and I try to argue our corporation should make the same profit in socialism as it did in capitalism. After all, with my log cutting example, I'm not going to be a lot stronger after the revolution, so I chop down many more trees. I'm not going to be a lot weaker after the revolution, so I chop down many fewer trees. I've been at roughly the same level of strength for many years now. I still have the same axe I have always used to chop down the trees, same sharpener I have to sharpen my axe, same workers, same talent, same tool, same equipment, should be the same product, should be the same sale, same customers down the hill needing to buy our wood so they can heat their homes and cook their food. Profits should be the same in socialism. If we're talking about cutting down 100 trees, just take the total profit picture, cut it into 100 pieces, you get 1 piece of the profit for every piece of the work for every tree that you cut. In capitalism, they can never return as much to the worker, because in capitalism, there's always a slice taken out first, represents the profits that go into the pockets of the rich owners, the major stockholders. 1% own 40%, 10% own 90%. They take their profit first. That reduces the amount available to go to the workers. And so I'm not talking about taxes. There will be taxes in socialism, same as in capitalism, death and taxes. They say we can't avoid. We need hospitals, we need roads, we need schools in socialism, same as in capitalism. There will be taxes in socialism, same as in capitalism. But in capitalism, there's another slice taken out, not taxes that go to the government, hopefully to serve the people. This is the profit taken by the rich owners, the multi-billionaires. 1% own 40%, 10% own 90%. They take their profit first. That reduces the amount available to go to the workers. Then they take the reduced amount. We cut 100 trees. You get 1/100th of the pie less for every tree that you cut. And so less for your work in capitalism, more for your work in socialism. A very simple argument reflecting my very simple mind that has designed these very simple lectures. We abolish private ownership of the means of production, redirect the money that in a capitalist economy like ours goes into the pockets of the rich owners, major stockholders, 1% own 40%, redirect their part of the profit along with all the rest of the profit back into the pockets of the workers according to how much work each individual has done. More money to pay you, some share of the rich owner's pocket redirected into your pocket on top of what you were making. More money to pay you, your pay goes up. As your pay goes up, you'll be happier in socialism than you were in capitalism, have greater incentive to want to go to work and be productive. And this doesn't just apply to the people on the assembly line, everybody in the factory or corporation. Managers in socialism will make more than they did in capitalism. On top of what they were making in capitalism, they will also get some share of the money that went into the pockets of the rich owners, redirected into the managers' pockets. People in research and development, don't forget the people in research and development. That should work better in socialism than in capitalism also. All the people in the research and development branches of the major corporations, on top of what they were making in capitalism. In socialism, they'll also get some share of the profit that would have gone into the pockets of the rich owners, redirected back into the pockets of the people in research and development. Workers, managers, people in research and development, everybody gets some share of the money that in capitalism went into the pockets of the rich owner. More money to pay you, your pay goes up. You'll be happier and willing to be more productive. And so I have shown so far how socialism can out capitalism. In other words, the socialists saying to you capitalists, we know what you capitalists are like. You're very materialistic. You only work for money. You'll only work extra for extra money. We socialists realize you capitalists are like this. It's not a big mystery to anybody in the world that you capitalists are materialistic like this. You only work for money? Fine. In socialism, we'll give you even more money. We'll out capitalism. We'll give you even more money. On top of the money that you are making in capitalism, you'll also be entitled to some share of the slice that would have gone into the pockets of the rich owners, redirected back into your pocket. More money to pay you, your incentive will go up, we'll out capitalism.